In the pounding rain of the Flagstaff woods, an orphan boy was dragged to the base of a tree, a gun pressed to his chest. But just before the trigger was pulled, a shadow burst through the mist. Cosmos, the dog. In that split second, past and present collided. A son tried to murder his own father, and a 13-year-old boy held in his pocket a secret powerful enough to shake the foundations of a government. It all began with an injured dog and an abandoned cabin hidden deep in the forest. The fog rolled in early that morning, blanketing the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona, in a thick, muted gray. It was the kind of silence that swallowed even the sound of wind. The pine trees, tall and unmoving, loomed like quiet sentinels around the worn-down cabin at the forest's edge. Inside the cabin, the wooden floor creaked under the small, barefoot steps of a boy. 13-year-old Josh Langley stood at the narrow kitchen window, his breath fogging up the cold glass as he stared into the mist. His chestnut hair was tousled from sleep, and his oversized hoodie, one that used to belong to his father, hung loosely on his slender frame. He didn't speak much, not to classmates, not even to his grandmother unless she prompted him. But his eyes, quiet, observing everything, held stories unspoken. His world was small, just him, Grandma Evelyn, and the forest that wrapped around their home like a forgotten mystery. His parents had died when he was 6, in a car accident so swift no one had a chance to say goodbye. Since then, the woods had become his sanctuary and solitude his closest companion. That morning, the air held the smell of pine, earth, and coming rain. Evelyn, white-haired and sharp-eyed despite her years, stood by the fireplace sipping tea, her back to him. "You're up early," she said gently without turning. Josh nodded, grabbed his sketch pad from the table, and slung his small canvas satchel across his shoulder. Inside were a few pieces of charcoal, a water bottle, and a Swiss Army knife, his personal treasures. He stepped outside, his boots crunching over the frost-bitten grass. A gust of wind blew across his face, carrying with it a chill that made him shiver. But he kept walking, following a familiar dirt path that wound around the trees. This was his daily ritual: wander, observe, draw. The forest, to him, wasn't just trees and trails. It was alive. It whispered things if you stood still long enough. Josh veered off the path after about 10 minutes, his fingers trailing against the rough bark of an aspen tree. He paused to sketch the texture into his pad, the lines fluid and instinctive. His drawings were his diary. Every rock, leaf, or shadow that caught his attention became a memory preserved in graphite. As he made his way toward a clearing to gather some fallen branches, something unfamiliar halted him. A sound, not loud but distinct, a soft, irregular panting. At first he thought it might have been a deer, maybe wounded. He crouched low, eyes scanning between the brambles and fallen pine needles. That's when he saw it. A shape, dark and unmoving, lay at the base of a tree about 20 feet ahead. Cautiously, Josh approached. The fog hung low, making it hard to distinguish details. But as he drew closer, the outline sharpened. Sleek black fur matted with dirt, a limp front leg, and eyes closed tight in exhaustion or pain. It was a dog, not a wild one. This one had a collar, torn, old, but there. Its chest rose and fell shallowly. One ear was nicked, and its side had a gash that still looked fresh. The blood had dried into the fur, and flies buzzed lightly around the wound. Josh knelt beside it, heart pounding. He reached out slowly. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered. The dog's eyes snapped open. Josh froze, but the dog didn't growl. Instead, it stared, deep, unreadable. Its eyes were a strange amber hue, not quite brown, not quite gold. There was no fear, no aggression, only something else, almost knowing. Josh's throat tightened. He couldn't leave it here. He didn't know why, but the thought of walking away felt wrong, like abandoning something sacred. He checked his bag. No food, just his water bottle. Gently, he tilted it and let a few drops trickle near the dog's mouth. The tongue moved. It licked the water, weakly but deliberately. Josh looked around. The forest was silent again, as if holding its breath. He unzipped his hoodie and laid it over the dog. It whimpered, but didn't move. Then, wrapping the arms of the hoodie beneath its belly, he gently attempted to lift it. It was heavier than he expected. He gritted his teeth, stumbled once, then adjusted. The journey back felt like forever. Each step was measured, slow. The dog's warm breath tickled against his arm, and he could feel its ribs through its fur. Twice he stopped to rest, once nearly dropping it, but he pressed on. When he reached the house, Evelyn was still by the fireplace. She turned and her eyes widened. "Josh, what in God's name?" He didn't speak, just looked at her, eyes pleading. She opened the door to the small shed out back, the one they used for tools and storage. Josh carried the dog inside, gently laid it on a stack of old towels, and began to clean the wound using warm water and antiseptic from the emergency kit. His hands trembled, but his touch was careful. Evelyn stood at the doorway, arms crossed, frowning, but she said nothing, only watched. Something flickered in her expression, something unreadable. Later that night, Josh sat beside the dog, the air filled with quiet breathing and the hum of crickets outside. He had laid out a pillow and a small bowl of water. The wound looked cleaner now, less angry. The dog hadn't moved much, but its gaze never left Josh. He took out his sketch pad again and started drawing. Not the trees this time, or the sky, but the dog, those eyes. He flipped to a fresh page and beneath the drawing scribbled a word in soft pencil. Cosmos. And for the first time in what felt like years, the cabin didn't feel so empty. The shed behind the cabin had once been used to store firewood and old tools, but now it served a new purpose: sanctuary. Josh moved quietly through the back door, carrying a bowl of warm broth he'd managed to sneak from the kitchen. The old wooden floor creaked under his weight, though he stepped as carefully as he could. Cosmos, he had already committed to the name, lay curled up on the blanket-covered floor, his breathing shallow but steady. The gash along his side had stopped oozing, and the swelling around his leg was beginning to subside. Josh had done his best to wrap the wound using a torn-up t-shirt and tape from the medicine drawer. Not perfect, but enough. He placed the bowl down slowly. The aroma stirred the dog's senses, and Cosmos blinked, eyes immediately locking with Josh's. Those eyes, an unnatural shade of gold, seemed to hold stories too deep for language. Josh watched as the dog sniffed the air, then dragged himself closer and lapped up the broth in weak but determined strokes. Josh exhaled in relief and sat back against a crate. The chill of the shed crept through his sweatshirt, but he didn't care. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing slender rays of afternoon light slicing through the trees like silent spears. "You're not just a stray, are you?" he whispered. Cosmos didn't answer, of course, but he tilted his head slightly as if he understood. He didn't bark. He hadn't barked once since Josh found him. No growl, no whimper, only that constant, unblinking stare. It was unnerving, yet oddly calming. Josh opened his sketch pad again. This time he tried to draw the eyes. Not just the shape, but the depth, the silence within them. The lines came slowly but with focus, and with every stroke, a strange sense of connection began to form. Like this creature wasn't just an animal, but something older, something watching him, maybe even protecting him. Later that evening, Josh entered the house through the front door, brushing his boots to rid them of dirt. Evelyn sat in her usual spot beside the fireplace, knitting something from deep maroon yarn. She glanced up, eyes sharp beneath her silver hair. "You've been gone a while," she said. Josh shrugged. "Was walking near the west trail." Evelyn's needles paused. "That far?" Josh nodded. She didn't press, but the pause in her knitting lingered for a few seconds longer than usual, before the needles resumed their rhythmic click-clack. "I told you to stay clear of that side," she muttered. "Why?" She looked at him with a gaze part wary, part faded nostalgia. "Just bad things happened there. Long ago, accidents, fires, people getting lost." Josh didn't argue, he never did. But something in her tone left a question mark hanging in the air between them. That night, he waited until she'd gone to bed before sneaking back out to the shed. Cosmos was awake this time, sitting upright, though not fully stable. He wagged his tail once, weakly, as Josh entered. The boy grinned, crouched beside him, and gently scratched behind his ears. "You're getting better." Again, the dog didn't make a sound. Josh stayed with him for a while, humming softly. Some old lullaby his mother used to sing. He didn't remember the words, only the tune. Cosmos rested his head on Josh's knee, eyes closing slowly. Satisfied, Josh returned to the house, crept into bed, and pulled the covers up to his chin. The room was quiet, the only sound being the distant hoot of an owl and the gentle rustle of trees beyond the windows. Then came the dream. At first it was a whisper, a rustling through thick leaves, shadows moving between trunks. Josh found himself standing in the forest, barefoot, the ground damp beneath his feet. The trees were darker than usual, taller, more twisted. Fog rolled between them like breath from an unseen giant. Somewhere ahead a voice cried out. It wasn't a scream but a plea, broken, faint. Help! Josh turned, trying to locate the source. The voice echoed, too far to pinpoint, too close to ignore. Then he saw something in the distance, a flickering orange glow, like firelight, moving as if it were breathing. He stepped forward, heart pounding. Branches reached for him like skeletal fingers. Then the voice came again, louder, panicked. Please! He began to run. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell into blackness, into silence, into... Josh bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. His fingers clutched the blanket like a lifeline. Moonlight seeped through the window, casting pale patterns across the wooden floor. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Evelyn stood at the doorway, her silhouette framed in the silver glow. She didn't speak, just looked at him, eyes clouded with something between concern and caution. You screamed, she finally said, voice hushed. Josh nodded slowly. Just a bad dream. She nodded in return, but didn't move. After a moment, she said, You've been going near the west edge again, haven't you? He looked down. A little. Another pause. If you go there, stay away from the ravine, she murmured. There's something in that forest. Things better left forgotten. Then she turned, footsteps retreating down the hall. Josh lay back down, staring at the ceiling, the fragments of the dream still vivid behind his eyelids. The voice, the firelight, the fall. He didn't know what it meant, but something told him that Cosmos, silent, strange, and somehow familiar, had brought more than just mystery into his life. Something was waking in those woods, and it was calling. By the third morning, Cosmos was no longer the wounded creature Josh had first found curled beneath the pines. The limp had lessened, and though he still moved carefully, there was a quiet urgency in his posture now. His eyes, those deep, gold-tinged eyes, had grown more intense, more focused. Josh noticed it first when he walked near the edge of the woods behind the cabin. Cosmos would rise, tail stiff, and follow closely behind him. Not playfully, deliberately. The moment Josh got within 20 feet of the forest border, Cosmos would bite gently at his hoodie or tug at the hem of his jeans, pulling him back, then looking toward the trees as if trying to speak through action. At first, Josh assumed the dog just didn't want him straying far. Maybe he was afraid of being left again. But each time it happened, the look in Cosmos's eyes told a different story. This wasn't fear. It was direction. By the fifth day, Josh stopped questioning it. The dream still haunted him. The cries in the forest, the flickering light, the sudden fall, and somehow, deep inside, he knew Cosmos had something to show him. That morning was colder than most. A thin layer of frost coated the grass like powdered sugar. Evelyn had gone into town to get supplies, and Josh stood near the tool shed, sketchbook in hand, staring at the tree line. Cosmos appeared behind him without a sound, nudged his knee with a cold nose, then looked toward the forest. Josh looked down. The dog's body was still slim, but his stance had regained its strength. He took a step toward the trees. Cosmos followed. Okay, Josh whispered, heart beating faster. Show me. They passed the familiar trail that led to the old logging path but veered off sharply after the third pine marker. Cosmos moved with purpose, weaving between thick trunks and ducking beneath low branches. Josh followed as quietly as he could, stepping over tangled roots and damp moss. The forest here was denser, untouched by regular hikers. The deeper they went, the more the silence shifted. Less peaceful, more expectant. About 10 minutes in, Josh noticed the change. The sunlight barely reached the ground now, filtered through the heavy canopy above. The air had a metallic tang, mixed with old bark and wet leaves. Cosmos paused, ears perked. Then he walked forward again, slowly toward a cluster of trees that leaned together unnaturally, forming a crooked arch. Beyond them, Josh saw it. At first glance, it looked like part of the forest itself, overgrown, forgotten. But as he stepped closer, the structure took shape. A cabin, or what used to be one. The roof sagged heavily in the center, caved in from years of storms. The walls were wrapped in thick ivy, and green moss crawled across every inch like skin over bone. It stood on a small rise of earth, surrounded by briars and fallen branches. Josh's breath caught. He had never seen this place before, not in any of his wandering. Cosmo stood still beside him, staring at the structure. No tail wag, no bark. Josh took a cautious step forward. The air here felt different. He could hear the high-pitched whine of insects, the rustling of leaves, but underneath it all, something else. A faint sound, a rhythm. Clack, clack, pause, clack. He froze. It was coming from inside. The sound wasn't natural. It wasn't the creak of old wood or wind through broken shingles. It was deliberate, metallic, like chains dragging or metal tapping stone. Then silence. Josh backed away instinctively, heart thudding in his ears. Cosmos didn't move. "Is someone in there?" he whispered, mostly to himself. No response. Josh stepped to the side, trying to get a better look. The front door had long since fallen off its hinges, leaving only a dark, yawning entryway. A broken chair lay on the porch, covered in leaves. Something glinted near the threshold. Rusted metal, maybe the edge of a tool or an old lock. Then came the sound again. Clack. Closer this time. Josh turned to Cosmos. "We have to go," he murmured, panic blooming in his chest. "Just for now." Cosmos didn't resist. They retraced their steps quickly, Josh looking over his shoulder every few seconds, unsure whether he expected a figure to appear or just the forest to shift behind him. When the cabin finally disappeared from view, swallowed by trees and shadows, he could breathe again. Back home, Josh dropped his bag by the door and ran into the kitchen. He grabbed a flashlight from the junk drawer, the big one Evelyn used during power outages, and checked the batteries. Still good. He filled his canteen, shoved it in his hoodie pocket, then grabbed the small folding knife from his shelf. Not for defense, but just in case. He glanced out the window. The fog had begun to return, curling low to the ground. Josh hesitated. A voice inside warned him to wait, to tell Evelyn, to call someone. But he knew what would happen. Adults dismiss things they didn't understand. He'd be grounded, or worse, they'd send someone to check. And by then, whatever, whoever, was there might be gone. Cosmo stood at the edge of the yard, watching. Josh tightened the grip on the flashlight and stepped out into the gathering mist. He was going back. The light was fading fast as Josh stepped back into the forest. Flashlight in hand, boots pressing deep into the moist earth. The familiar path, if it could be called that, seemed more menacing now, swallowed in heavy fog that curled around tree trunks like fingers. Each step cracked twigs and stirred dry leaves, but Josh didn't slow down. Cosmos led the way again, silent as ever, his sleek black form gliding ahead like a shadow with purpose. Josh had only one destination in mind, the cabin. When they finally arrived, the place looked even more decayed than it had that morning. The fog clung to the sagging roof, and ivy swayed faintly in the breeze like it was breathing. Josh hesitated at the tree line, heart hammering, then moved toward the porch. Clack! There it was again. He froze. This time it wasn't just the sound, it was followed by something more human. A voice, soft, ragged, barely audible. "Help!" Josh snapped his head toward the cabin's dark entryway, gripping the flashlight tighter. The voice came again, this time slightly louder, as if whoever it belonged to had used the last of their strength to push it through the air. Please." The boy swallowed hard and stepped up onto the creaking porch, wood groaning beneath his weight. The flashlight beam swept across broken furniture, moldy curtains flapping from shattered windows, and dust dancing like ash. Then movement. Behind the cabin, Josh circled around, boots slipping on wet leaves and moss. Cosmos stayed close now, his hackles raised. As they reached the back of the structure, the beam of Josh's flashlight landed on something odd. Another door, narrow, weather-warped, partially buried beneath thick vines. He stepped closer. The clack had come from here, the voice too. Josh knelt, using his pocket knife to cut away the thickest vines. They snapped with a dry crackle, revealing the wood beneath. The handle was rusted but intact. He gripped it, pulled. At first it wouldn't budge. Then with a hard yank it gave way, shrieking on its hinges as if protesting the light. Inside, darkness. Deeper than outside. Musty air poured out, thick with mildew, age, and something else. Sweat, metal, fear. Josh shone the beam in. The room was small. Concrete floor, cracked walls. Shelves collapsed against one side. And in the far left corner, slumped against a rusted radiator pipe, was a man. At first, Josh thought it was a corpse. The figure was gaunt, wrapped in tattered layers of flannel and denim, his limbs bony and curled like he hadn't moved in years. Long white hair fell in tangled mats across his shoulders, and a beard cloaked the lower half of his hollow face. But his eyes, wide open, alert, burning with something fierce beneath the dirt. Josh gasped, taking a step back. The man didn't move, only watched. Then hoarse and dry, You're not him." Josh's voice caught in his throat. "Who are you?" The man coughed, a ragged sound. "Not important, but you're not him. The one who comes to check. You're just a kid." Josh stepped inside, slowly. "Are you hurt?" The man's gaze dropped to his ankle. Josh followed it, and his stomach turned. A thick iron cuff circled the man's leg, bolted to the radiator with a heavy chain. He was shackled. Josh stepped closer, disbelief washing over him like ice water. "How long have you been here?" The man's lips trembled as he tried to speak again. "Too long," he whispered. "I stopped counting. Years, decades maybe. Everything blurs after a while." Josh moved the flashlight closer. The man flinched at first, then settled, blinking against the glare. His eyes were pale blue beneath the grime, sharp, intelligent, even in exhaustion. "What's your name?" Josh asked, voice low. The man hesitated. Walter Keene." Josh's eyes widened. "Keene? There was a story. My grandmother once—" Walter cut in sharply. "Don't tell anyone. Don't tell her. Don't tell the police. Don't say anything." Josh blinked. "Why not? You're chained up. You've been kidnapped. We have to—" "No," Walter snapped, sudden fire in his voice. "No one can know. He's still out there. He checks. He listens. You call someone, he'll know. He'll make me disappear for good." Josh took a step back, confusion and fear tangling in his chest. "Who's he?" Walter looked past him into the dark. "My son." Josh stared at him in disbelief. "Your son did this to you?" Walter closed his eyes. "He works for people, powerful people. I knew too much, years ago. I tried to expose them. He turned on me, said I was a threat." Josh's heart pounded. "What did you know?" Walter coughed again. "There was a test. In these woods, a gas, military, experimental. Back in '91, they said it was abandoned, but it wasn't. They buried it, covered it with lies. I was part of the team. Then I tried to blow the whistle." He opened his eyes again. "And then I disappeared." Josh couldn't breathe. 30 years? Walter gave a bitter smile. "Time doesn't feel real in here." Cosmo stepped forward then, into the room. The dog locked eyes with Walter, and something in Walter's expression shifted. Softer, almost recognition. "That dog," he murmured. "He's like one I used to know. From years ago. Same eyes." Josh swallowed. "His name's Cosmos. I found him near the edge of the forest." Walter nodded slowly. "He brought you here. That's not a coincidence." Josh hesitated, then asked, "What do I do?" Walter stared at him, voice just above a whisper. "You run. You stay silent. You wait until the right moment. And when you see him, don't let him see you." Josh stepped back, flashlight flickering slightly. The cabin groaned behind him, as if reacting to the words. "I'll come back," Josh said. "I promise." And then with Cosmos by his side, he slipped into the woods again. Heart pounding, mind racing, and for the first time in his life, carrying a secret older than he could imagine. Josh returned the next day, just after sunrise when Evelyn was still asleep, and the forest was wrapped in a soft blanket of mist. He had packed a small bag, water, a few protein bars, fresh gauze, rubbing alcohol, and a pencil with a tiny notepad. He didn't know why, but something told him he'd need to write things down. Cosmos led the way again, weaving silently between trees, pausing only when Josh hesitated. The forest, still damp from a recent rain, smelled of pine needles and forgotten things. When they reached the cabin, Josh moved around to the back entrance where he'd found Walter. The door was still slightly ajar. Walter was there, slumped against the wall, breathing slowly but conscious. His skin looked more sunken in the morning light. but his eyes lit up when he saw Josh. "You came back," he rasped. Josh handed him water, helped him drink. "I brought more bandages, too." Walter nodded, swallowing with effort. "Thank you." Josh sat down on the dusty floor, cross-legged, flashlight off. A single shaft of light pierced through a crack in the roof above, casting a muted glow over them. Cosmos lay curled near the door, eyes half-lidded but alert. "I need to know," Josh said. "What happened? Why are you here?" Walter was silent for a moment. Then he sighed and looked up toward the rotted ceiling. "It was 1991, he began. Cold spring. I was working for a government subcontractor, fronted as an environmental agency. My specialty was atmospheric mapping, chemical dispersion patterns. We were told we were studying pollution drift, wildfire residue, you name it. We came here, this forest, to build a small test station." He gestured around him weakly. This cabin was a cover. Beneath it, in the clearing about 50 meters out, there was a buried control panel, hooked into sensors spread across the forest. But we weren't monitoring air quality. We were testing something else. Josh leaned forward. "What?" Walter met his eyes. "Aerosolized neurotoxin," he said flatly. "Classified. A slow-acting gas. Invisible. Designed to target neurological pathways and mimic symptoms of dementia or mental collapse. The theory was, if deployed subtly, it could make anyone look like they were going insane, without leaving forensic evidence." Josh felt the blood drain from his face. "Why here?" he asked. Walter chuckled bitterly. "Because it was isolated. Remote. We used wildlife at first. Watched the way birds flew differently, how predators changed feeding patterns. But then we moved on to human testing. Unknowingly." What, what do you mean?" "There were hikers, families. We were told they were random, people who just happened to pass through. But they weren't. Some of them were flagged. Activists, whistleblowers. People the agency wanted discredited. The gas was released in microbursts as they moved through the testing zone. A few weeks later, reports of mental breakdowns. One man threw himself into a lake. A woman went missing and was never found." Josh's hands were clenched into fists. "That's murder." Walter nodded. "That's what I said. I confronted my superior. Told him I was documenting everything. I had files, maps, logs, even recorded conversations." He looked down. "I never made it to the press. I never made it out. My son did." Josh's brow furrowed. "What?" "My son, Lucas. He had just joined the Defense Directorate. High clearance. Smart kid. Too smart. He found out what I was doing, what I was planning, told me I was endangering national security, that I was betraying my oath. I thought he was bluffing, until one night he came to the cabin." Walter tapped the chain around his ankle. "I woke up here, bound, stripped of ID, phone, everything. He said he'd found a way to contain the problem, that I'd vanish like the others. Only no one would ever question it, because I already had a reputation for paranoia. The agency doctored old emails, planted false breakdown reports. He had the means to rewrite my story." Josh felt a cold chill crawling up his spine. "But why keep you alive?" Walter's smile was bleak. "Because he still wanted to believe he wasn't a killer. Because part of him hoped I'd break and admit I was wrong. And maybe it's because he wasn't done using the land." Josh's voice was barely audible. "Using it for what?" Walter's gaze shifted toward the wall. "There's still equipment buried here. Some of it's gone dormant, but some still activates at certain intervals. I've heard it. Clicks, pulses, low frequencies. They're still running data. Still refining the gas." Josh looked around the cabin. "You mean this is still an active test site?" Walter nodded slowly. "Just not officially." Josh felt dizzy. All of it, this rotten structure, the sealed-off sections of forest Evelyn never talked about, the nightmares, the voices. They weren't imagination. They were echoes, residue, history refusing to stay buried. He glanced down at Cosmos, who was now staring directly at Walter. "You said yesterday," Josh whispered, "that Cosmos reminded you of a dog you once knew." Walter's eyes softened. "I did. Her name was Midnight. She belonged to someone I once loved very much. Long time ago. Before the war. Before this." Josh swallowed hard. He suddenly understood. "My grandmother, Evelyn." Walter froze. "Evelyn Thorne," Josh said. "She lives at the edge of the woods. She raised me after my parents died. For a moment, the silence in the room felt like a held breath. Walter leaned back against the wall, eyes shimmering with something that looked like grief and wonder colliding. Evelyn! He whispered her name like it was a ghost. I thought she moved away. I thought she'd forgotten me. Josh's heart pounded. She never talked about you. Just once. When I asked about the West Woods, she got quiet. Said people got lost out there. That things happened. She never said your name. Walter nodded slowly, tears threatening to gather at the corners of his eyes. I should have written. I should have found a way. Cosmos stood then, walked over, and pressed his head gently into Walter's knee. Josh watched them, everything inside him swirling. Rage at what had been done, confusion about what to do next, and the weight of a secret too heavy for one boy to carry alone. But he would carry it. For now. Josh didn't speak on the way home. Not to Cosmos, not to himself, not even in his thoughts. The trees seemed taller now, the sky grayer, the air heavier. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of a bird taking flight, set his nerves on edge. He couldn't shake the image of Walter chained to the radiator, eyes sharp with intelligence, yet dulled with decades of solitude. What he had said about the gas, about the project, about Lucas, it all played on a loop inside Josh's head like a broken film reel. Back at the cabin, Evelyn was humming softly as she tended to a pot on the stove. The smell of roasted root vegetables and rosemary should have been comforting. It wasn't. Josh slipped through the door quietly. Cosmos padded in behind him and curled up by the fireplace, resting his head on his paws. Evelyn turned slightly, gave Josh a soft glance. You were gone early again, she said. Josh nodded, avoiding her eyes. Just walking, cleared my head. She stirred the pot. Forrest always did that for me too. Josh mumbled something and made his way to his room. As soon as the door shut, he locked it. He collapsed onto his bed, fingers trembling slightly. His backpack was still slung over his shoulder. He slid it off and set it down gently, like it contained something breakable. For a few minutes, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything Walter had told him. It was too big, too dark, and worst of all, it didn't sound impossible. That's what scared Josh the most. Not that a man had been secretly imprisoned for 30 years, but that someone, his own son, had the resources, connections, and coldness to make it happen, and erase every trace. He sat up, grabbed his tablet from the desk, and opened the browser. If Walter had really existed, if he had really worked on a government contract, there had to be something left behind. A footprint, a whisper. Josh typed in, Walter Keene, Flagstaff environmental researcher missing. At first, nothing but noise. Articles on other people with similar names, obituaries, scientific journals. Then something caught his eye. A PDF scan of an old newspaper from 1993. Local engineer disappears amidst investigation. Josh clicked. The article was brief, poorly edited, clearly rushed. It said that Walter Keene, 51, a consultant with the Department of Environmental Studies, had gone missing near the Coconino Forest region. No signs of foul play, no suspects. The case went cold within weeks. Josh's throat tightened. There was a black and white photo, grainy, but it was him. A younger version, sure, but the same eyes, the same sharp jaw, the same intensity. Another search. He dug deeper. An obscure forum post from 2009 mentioned rumors of a whistleblower in Flagstaff who vanished after trying to expose shady testing in protected land. The thread had no replies. The account was deleted. Josh leaned back. It was real. Everything Walter had said, at least the foundation of it, checked out. He hadn't imagined it. He wasn't being manipulated by some lunatic in the woods. And then something else hit him like a wave. Evelyn knew. Maybe not everything, maybe not the details, but she knew something, more than she'd ever let on. And that name, the way Walter had said it, barely above a whisper, like a wound never healed. He glanced toward the door, then quietly rose and peeked out. Evelyn was still in the kitchen, back to him, sipping tea by the window. Cosmos was asleep near the fire. Josh tiptoed to the hallway closet, pulled out an old hiking satchel, and returned to his room. He filled it methodically. First aid kit, bottled water, crackers, flashlight, a Swiss Army knife. Then he grabbed the fixed blade knife from the shelf above his desk, the one his dad had used for fishing, still in its leather sheath. He hesitated, then tucked it in beside the flashlight. He didn't know what he'd face if he went back. Walter had said Lucas came around sometimes, monitored, watched. Josh had to be ready for anything. He scribbled a quick note just in case. Not to tell Evelyn everything, just enough to not raise panic. Went for a walk, took snacks, be back by nightfall. Don't worry. He left it on his pillow, tucked beneath a book so she'd find it if she came in. Then slipping through the back door as quietly as a shadow, Josh vanished into the trees once more. Cosmos stirred at the sound of the latch, rose to his feet and followed. The forest welcomed them again, not as strangers, but as secrets in motion. This time Josh didn't hesitate. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going back empty-handed. The deeper Josh moved into the forest, the quieter the world became. No birdsong, no wind. Only the steady crunch of his boots against damp earth and the soft padding of Cosmos by his side. The late afternoon light filtered through the trees like thin strands of gold, but the shadows felt longer today, like the forest was holding its breath. Josh had walked this path twice before, but now every tree looked unfamiliar. Every branch felt like it was reaching toward him. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt watched. He slowed near the old clearing, where the overgrown trees opened up around a ring of mossy stones. That's when he heard it, a footstep. Not his. Josh stopped mid-step, his breath catching. Cosmos froze beside him, ears alert, head tilted toward the sound. For a second, Josh thought it was a deer. But then came another sound, more deliberate. A rustle, then silence. Then with a soft crunch of gravel under a boot. Josh turned slowly. Through the dense trees barely visible beyond the ferns stood a man. He wasn't old, maybe mid-40s, dressed in all black, jacket, pants, hiking boots. His hands were stuffed in his pockets, but it was the glasses that stood out. Large, reflective, and dark enough to hide his eyes completely. He was too far to see clearly, but he wasn't moving. Just watching. Josh's chest tightened. He turned away quickly and walked faster, pretending he hadn't noticed, but the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He knew he was being followed. Cosmos began to growl low in his throat. The man moved. Josh heard it, just a single step, but it confirmed what his gut already knew. He broke into a jog, ducking under low branches, pushing through brambles. The trees blurred past him in streaks of green and gray. He didn't stop until he reached the cabin. He stumbled behind it, toward the hidden door, heart thudding, sweat slicking his palms. Cosmos barked once, short and sharp, then stopped as Josh yanked open the old wooden door and slipped inside. Walter was there, propped against the wall, eyes wide. "What happened?" he asked, voice taut. "Someone's out there," Josh panted. "He was watching me. Black jacket, sunglasses. Didn't say a word." Walter cursed under his breath. "Lucas?" Josh stared at him. "You think that was your son?" Walter nodded grimly. "He checks the area, not often, but when he feels something's off, he'll know someone's been here." Josh moved to the doorway, peering out into the trees, but saw nothing now. The forest was still, deceptively calm. Walter leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "If you've come this far, you need to take something." He pointed toward a corner of the room, where an old, crumbling statue of an eagle sat on a dusty wooden crate. Its stone wings were cracked, and lichen had begun to grow in the crevices. It looked like just another relic of decay. Walter gestured with a trembling hand. "Underneath it, bottom panel." Josh approached, pulled the statue aside carefully. It was heavier than it looked. Beneath it, on the wooden crate, was a small wooden square, like a false floor. Josh pried it open with the tip of his knife. Inside sat a black USB drive, wrapped in a thin plastic sleeve. Josh picked it up slowly. "This is it?" he asked. Walter nodded. 30 years worth of data, scans, documents, audio recordings, enough to burn the whole program to the ground. Josh turned the drive over in his hand. "Why haven't you used it?" Walter gave a bitter smile. "Because I didn't have anyone left to trust. Everyone I knew is either dead, discredited, or bought off. And because if I tried to send it through any channel, Lucas would have known. He's plugged into everything." Josh looked at him, realization dawning. "So you waited for someone to stumble into you?" "I waited for a chance," Walter corrected. "For anyone who still had a sense of right and wrong. Someone the system hadn't broken yet." Josh glanced at the door again. "If he saw me, he'll come back." Walter's expression darkened. "Then you need to be gone before he does. And you need to hide that. Don't put it online. Don't plug it into anything connected to your house or your school. He monitors activity spikes in this region. Josh's fingers closed around the USB. Where can I go? Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. There's a library in town, old one. Downtown Flagstaff. Public terminals. You go there, copy everything into an external backup, offline, lock it with a password, then bury the original. Somewhere only you know. Josh stared at him. Walter continued. Once you have that copy, give it to someone outside the system. Not a cop, not a politician, a reporter, an activist. Hell, even a university professor with tenure. Someone who has nothing to lose. Josh nodded slowly. Can I come back? He asked. Walter smiled faintly. If I'm still here. Josh slipped the drive into the inside pocket of his hoodie, zipped it shut, and stood. Cosmos was already at the door, tail twitching nervously. Josh turned to Walter one last time. You said you were waiting for someone. I was, Walter said softly. And then you showed up. Josh gave a small nod. I'll be back. And with that, he vanished into the forest again, this time carrying the weight of truth in his pocket and the growing shadow of something much darker at his heels. Josh emerged from the cabin like a shadow, careful not to make a sound. The sun had begun its slow descent, bleeding orange through the trees, casting everything in long, uneasy shadows. The air was still, too still, and the silence screamed louder than any noise could. Cosmos walked beside him, tense, ears raised. The USB drive was tucked securely inside Josh's hoodie, every step amplifying its weight, like carrying something radioactive. They moved through the underbrush, sticks snapping underfoot. And then, a sudden crack behind them. Josh spun. Too late. The man in black lunged from the shadows, one hand grabbing Josh by the collar, the other slamming him against a tree with stunning force. Bark tore at his shoulder. The world tilted. His ears rang. The man wore the same dark sunglasses, but closer now, Josh could see the dead calm beneath them. Not rage, not panic, just procedure. Give it, the man growled, low and cold. Josh tried to twist away, but the man's grip tightened, cutting off breath. Then movement, a blur of black muscle in motion. Cosmos. The dog crashed into the man's side like a missile, snarling, teeth bared. The force knocked him off balance, breaking his grip on Josh. They tumbled to the forest floor, man and dog, and Josh stumbled back, gasping, reaching for his bag. The man roared and kicked Cosmos hard in the ribs, sending him yelping into a fallen log. Josh's scream caught in his throat, rage and panic colliding. He grabbed a branch, thick, solid, and swung with everything he had. It hit, not hard enough to knock the man out, but enough to stagger him. The sunglasses flew off. He cursed, blood trickling from his lip. Josh didn't wait. He ran. Cosmos limped behind him, panting, hurt but mobile. The forest blurred into streaks of green and gold. Josh had no idea where he was going, only that it had to be far, fast, and out of sight. After what felt like forever, he ducked behind a thicket of brambles near a dry creek bed, collapsed to his knees and pulled out his phone. Hands shaking, he unlocked it and dialed 911. One bar. He turned, lifting the phone higher. A second bar blinked on. It connected. 911, what is your emergency? Josh kept his voice low. There's a man, he attacked me, in the forest west of Flagstaff. There's an old cabin near an overgrown clearing. He's keeping someone prisoner. Coordinates. He fumbled to open his map app, heart hammering. I'm sending the location now. Please, someone needs help. His name is Walter Keene. He's been missing for 30 years. The line crackled. No, wait, don't hang up. Screen froze, the spinning wheel of death. And then, call dropped. Josh stared at the phone. No. He tried again. Signal gone, dead zone. He let out a sharp breath, eyes darting around the forest, adrenaline still pounding through his veins. He couldn't go back, not yet, and he couldn't risk drawing attention. Cosmos limped up beside him and nudged his knee with his nose, still alert despite the blow. Josh reached into his hoodie, touched the drive. That man, Lucas, it had to be. He'd known exactly what Josh was carrying. Walter had been right. The cabin was still being monitored. The project wasn't buried. It was sleeping, and someone had just kicked it awake. Josh looked at the blood on his fingers, his or Lucas's, he wasn't sure, and clenched his jaw. He had to vanish again, not just to survive, but to finish what he'd started. The first raindrop struck Josh's cheek like a warning. Then another and another. Within seconds, the sky opened up, releasing a torrential downpour that swallowed the forest in sheets of water. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp and sudden, rattling the canopy. Trees shivered. The ground turned slick beneath Josh's boots. He pushed forward anyway, lungs burning, hair plastered to his forehead. Cosmos darted ahead through the trees, limping but determined, his black coat soaked to the skin. Josh had one destination in mind, back to the cabin, to Walter. If Lucas was still close, Walter had to be warned. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the forest in violent flashes. Josh nearly slipped climbing an embankment, but caught himself on a root. His fingers were raw. His breath came in shallow bursts. The rain was relentless. By the time he reached the clearing, the old cabin looked like it was sinking under the weight of the storm. Water poured from the sagging roof. Vines whipped in the wind like lashes. He pushed open the back door and slipped inside. Walter was awake, eyes wide, already trying to sit up. He looked worse, face pale, lips chapped, shivering in the cold. "Lucas knows," Josh gasped. "He found me. He attacked me." Walter's shoulders stiffened. "Did he get the drive?" Josh shook his head, pulled it from his pocket. "Still here." Walter let out a shaky breath of relief, then grimaced as thunder shook the walls. "We need to move," he said. "Now, before he comes back." Josh didn't argue. Together, they made their way out into the storm. Walter leaned heavily on Josh, each step a struggle. Josh didn't know where he was going, only that it had to be somewhere deep enough, hidden enough, for them to vanish until help arrived. If it ever did. They didn't make it far before the wind grew stronger, howling through the branches like a warning. Trees bent, groaned, snapped. Rain stung their faces like icy needles. Josh spotted a fallen pine tree with a hollowed-out trunk, partially shielded by rocks and moss. He led Walter toward it. They collapsed beneath the shelter, water still dripping through the cracks. The space was tight, muddy and cold, but it was cover. For now it would do. Walter's teeth chattered as he tried to speak. "You should have left me." "No," Josh said, pressing his back against the bark. "We're in this together now." Cosmos stood outside the shelter for a moment, sniffing the air, ears back. Then he darted into the trees. "Cosmos?" Josh called out. No answer. The dog vanished into the rain like a ghost. Josh stared after him, heart pounding. "He just ran." "He senses something," Walter murmured. "He's not just a dog, never was." Another crash of thunder, then a sound. A distant whine. No, a siren. Faint, muffled by the storm, but real. Josh sat up straighter, straining to hear. The high-pitched cry of a police vehicle echoing faintly through the canyon of trees. "They heard me," he whispered. "They're coming." Walter turned his head slightly, his face unreadable. But then another sound cut through the rain. Not a siren. A voice. Low, sharp, far too close. "You always were dramatic, Dad." Josh froze. A figure stepped through the trees, outlined in the strobing light of the storm. He was soaked, water running from his coat and dripping from his jaw. In one hand he held a flashlight. In the other, pointed directly at them, a gun. Lucas Keene. Josh recognized him instantly. The same man from the forest. The one who had attacked him. Now closer, in the storm light, his face was clearer, older than Josh expected, but stern. Controlled. Void of regret. Walter pulled himself upright with difficulty. "Lucas, don't do this." Lucas tilted his head, almost curious. "Do what exactly?" "Clean up the mess you made. Contain the leak before it spreads." Josh moved slightly in front of Walter, shielding him. "The police are on their way." Lucas smiled faintly. "Are they?" He stepped closer, gun steady. "The transmission from your phone call pinged a tower 5 miles east. The terrain will slow them. Rain helps too. I'd say we have maybe 10 minutes. Josh's heart thundered. Lucas shifted the flashlight toward him. "You should have stayed out of it. You're just a kid." "And you're a criminal," Josh snapped. "He trusted you. He's your father." Lucas's jaw twitched. "He stopped being my father when he betrayed everything I worked for. Everything this country needed." Walter coughed, voice barely audible. "You think this is patriotism?" "I think it's survival," Lucas said coldly. He raised the gun. And then, a blur of black fur launched from the side. Cosmos. He struck Lucas with terrifying speed, fangs catching flesh. Lucas cried out, stumbled, fired. The gunshot cracked through the storm. Josh screamed. The flashlight hit the ground, skidding across the mud. Cosmos growled, holding Lucas by the arm, refusing to let go. Josh lunged for the gun, kicking it into the underbrush. Lucas shoved Cosmos away, blood on his sleeve, and disappeared into the trees, swallowed by the dark, the rain, and the thunder. Cosmos limped back toward Josh, shaking violently but still standing. Walter sat frozen in the hollow of the tree, staring at where his son had stood, at the monster he'd helped create. Josh knelt beside him. "We're not done," he said, voice steady. Walter nodded faintly, rain trickling down his face like tears. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, a muted rhythm against the leaves. The storm's roar was gone, but the tension hung heavier than thunder ever could. Josh sat close to Walter beneath the shelter of the fallen tree. Cosmos curled beside them, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The dog was exhausted, bleeding slightly at the flank, but alert. Josh's own heart hadn't slowed since the gunshot. He kept scanning the trees, waiting for the next movement, the next threat. It didn't take long. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, squishing through the mud. Then the shadow returned. Lucas. One hand pressed to the wound on his arm, the other gripping the gun again, streaked with blood and rain. "Move," he said. Josh stood, fist clenched. "No." Lucas raised the weapon slightly, eyes on his father. "Then you die too." Walter's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Lucas, look at me." Lucas hesitated. "I said look at me," Walter repeated, rising to a kneel, his body trembling but his voice firm. For the first time, Lucas's hand wavered. "You think I wanted this?" Walter asked, his voice cracking, not from fear, but from grief. "You think I planned to disappear and let you rot in that system?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "You did disappear. I was 10. I was silenced," Walter hissed. "Locked away by people I thought I could expose. I thought I'd have time to fix it. I thought you were safe. With your mother, with school, with a future." Lucas shook his head. "They recruited me at 14, military prep, intelligence at 16. By then, they already told me you'd gone mad." Walter's breath caught. "They showed me files," Lucas continued, his voice distant. "Said you had a breakdown, that you endangered national security, that you ran away. And I believed them." Walter took a shaky step forward. "And when did you stop believing them?" Lucas's silence said everything. "You knew," Walter whispered. "You knew the truth." "I suspected," Lucas admitted, "but I was already in too deep. They gave me purpose, control, something I never had when you left." Walter's eyes glistened with tears. "You think control is power? You think burying me made you strong? You're a prisoner, Lucas. Not to them. To the version of me they built in your head." Lucas's grip on the gun faltered for a split second. Josh stepped closer. "You don't have to be this. You don't have to end it like this." Lucas stared at him, eyes filled with confusion and something that looked eerily like regret. But then it vanished, wiped clean by cold calculation. "I'm finishing what should have been finished 30 years ago," he said. He raised the gun, aiming directly at Walter's chest. Walter didn't flinch. He just whispered, "I forgive you." Lucas hesitated, and that was all it took. Cosmos launched from behind Josh, one last surge of strength, a blur of teeth and fur, claws scraping bark and mud. The impact knocked Lucas off balance. The gun fired, wild, harmlessly into the trees. Josh dove. The weapon hit the mud and skidded. Cosmos clamped his jaws onto Lucas's wrist, forcing him to the ground. Lucas yelled, kicking, trying to shake the dog off. But before he could reach for anything else, flashing lights cut through the mist. A siren, then more voices, sharp, commanding. "Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them!" Officers poured from the tree line. State police, uniforms slick with rain, weapons drawn. Two of them tackled Lucas to the ground. Cosmos backed away, limping. Fur bristled, but still baring teeth. Lucas struggled for a moment, then collapsed, defeated. The gun was kicked far out of reach. Josh dropped to his knees, heart finally cracking under the weight of it all. Walter slumped behind him, tears falling silently, not from fear, but from release. An officer approached Josh. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" Josh shook his head. "We're okay. But he pointed to Walter. "He's been held here for 30 years. The officer's face shifted instantly, shock washing over duty. "We need a medic over here." Two paramedics rushed in, kneeling beside Walter as they began to examine him. Josh turned to Cosmos and dropped to the ground, pulling the dog into his arms. "You saved us," he whispered. Again. The rain continued to fall gently, washing away blood, mud, and 30 years of silence. And somewhere, between the flashlights and the sirens, a broken family shattered one last time, before the truth finally began to take root. The news broke the following morning. Footage of Walter Keene being wheeled into the hospital flooded every major network in Arizona. Grainy images showed paramedics guiding the frail man through emergency room doors, while officers flanked the ambulance. His eyes, sunken but alive, stared straight into the camera. The headline read, "Missing Engineer Found Alive After 30 Years. Alleged Government Cover-Up Under Investigation." Josh sat frozen on the couch, fingers gripping the edge of a blanket. Evelyn stood behind him, tea cooling in her hands, forgotten. The moment she saw the broadcast, the cup slipped from her fingers and shattered against the floor. She didn't speak at first. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, she just stared, like someone watching a ghost walk across their front yard. Josh turned to her. "Grandma?" But Evelyn didn't hear him. Her knees buckled, and she lowered herself slowly into the nearest chair, eyes still fixed on the screen. They showed his face again. Walter, aged and weathered, but unmistakably him. Reporters spoke rapidly about conspiracy, DNA confirmation, a full investigation underway. But Evelyn only saw the man beneath it all. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Walter." Josh moved beside her. You knew him." She nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago." Silence hung in the room, broken only by the soft hum of the television. Then Evelyn reached for Josh's hand, gripping it tightly. "He was my first love," she said, her voice trembling with decades of memory. "We were just teenagers. Before the war. Before everything." Josh leaned in closer. "You never told me." "I never thought I'd have to," she said. "We were separated when he got drafted. Letters stopped coming. I thought he'd died in combat. Then one day, years later, I heard he'd come back, taken a job with the government. But by then, I was married, pregnant. The timing was too late." Josh said nothing. He let the silence speak for both of them. Evelyn's eyes clouded as they returned to the screen, where Walter was being stabilized, the camera panning to a table where police laid out the evidence. Files, maps, and one small, dirt-smeared USB drive. "I never saw him again," she said quietly, "until now." Josh shifted. "He remembered you. He said your name. Whispered it, like it still hurt." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I thought I'd buried that part of my life. Locked it away." Josh hesitated. "There's something else." He rose and crossed the room, where Cosmos was resting by the fireplace. He knelt beside the dog and gently lifted his chin so Evelyn could see his eyes. Golden, intelligent, deep as memory itself. Evelyn gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. "No," she breathed. "It can't be." Josh nodded. "His name's Cosmos. I found him the same day I found Walter. But when Walter saw him, he said something. He said, he looked just like Midnight." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears. "That's because he does," she whispered. "Midnight was my dog, my heart." She waited by the porch every evening during the war, waiting for Walter to come home. She never gave up, even after he didn't return. She died a year later. Josh was quiet. Evelyn leaned closer, staring at Cosmos, who looked back at her as if recognizing something ancient. "She had a litter just before she passed," Evelyn said. "We gave them away. I never knew what happened to the pups." Josh blinked slowly. "What if Cosmos is one of them?" "Not one," she whispered, "but the last. Look at him. The same stare, the same silence. Midnight never barked either, not unless she had to. Always watched, always understood more than she should." The room felt smaller, filled with memory and something neither of them could name. Josh sat down beside her. "He brought me to Walter, saved us, more than once. It's like he knew." Evelyn ran a hand through her hair, the color of snow, then down to her heart. "Maybe he did." They sat in silence for a long time, watching as the news rolled forward. Politicians dodged questions. Journalists speculated. The world began to react to a truth hidden for 3 decades. But in the little cabin on the edge of the woods, it was something else that filled the space. Not shock, not anger. Memory. Of the full circle of time, and the echo of a connection that had never really died. Time moved differently after the truth came out. The investigation would take months. There would be hearings, interviews, denials. Files would leak, names would surface, and the country would grapple with yet another wound hidden under layers of bureaucracy and silence. But for Josh, life didn't feel like it was on a national stage anymore. It felt quiet, peaceful. Walter was released from the hospital after 3 weeks. Thinner than before, a bit slower, but sharper than anyone expected. The moment he stepped onto Evelyn's porch, the same one he had once kissed her goodbye on nearly 50 years earlier, he didn't say a word. He just looked at her. She stepped forward and took his hand. Josh watched from the doorway, heart full. Walter moved in with them quietly without fanfare. No papers, no contracts, just a room down the hall, a soft chair by the window, and a cup of coffee ready every morning before sunrise. Josh was no longer just the quiet boy who sketched trees and kept to himself. He had questions now. He had stories. He had someone to tell them to. Walter became more than just a survivor in the house. He became something Josh had never known before, a grandfather. They would sit together for hours, cosmos at their feet, talking about space, machines, resistance. Walter had once designed flight systems for NASA, long before the project that ruined his life. He taught Josh about air pressure, thermal coils, and orbital decay. But more importantly, he listened. Josh shared dreams, fears, drawings. He asked questions no one else had bothered to answer. And Walter answered everyone. Evelyn, for her part, seemed to glow in a way Josh had never seen. She moved with new energy, laughed more, cooked things she hadn't made in years. Sometimes in the early morning, when she thought no one was looking, she and Walter would sit on the porch, her hand resting on his, both of them gazing into the forest with the stillness of people who had waited a lifetime for peace. And through it all, Cosmos remained. He was never far. He'd sleep at the foot of Josh's bed every night, accompany Evelyn on short walks, and lie beside Walter's chair when the evenings turned cold. He was more than just a dog. He was the thread that tied them all together. A piece of the past, a guide to the truth, a silent witness to everything broken and everything beginning to heal. Then came the first snow. Josh woke up that morning to white light spilling through the window. He rushed outside barefoot, his breath visible in the crisp air, the forest wrapped in silence. It was the kind of quiet that felt holy. Evelyn stood beside the porch with a scarf wrapped around her neck, eyes twinkling as she watched him run through the snow. Walter joined them, a cane in one hand, Cosmos trotting gently beside him. Josh turned to them, cheeks flushed. "Let's go for a walk," he said. No one argued. They moved together, 3 generations and a dog, into the woods that had once held secrets and sorrow, now blanketed in peace. The pines sparkled under the morning sun, and each step crunched softly beneath their boots. No words were needed. Cosmos led the way, tail wagging slowly, golden eyes gleaming with something eternal. At a clearing not far from the old trail, they stopped. Josh looked up at Walter. "Do you think everything happens for a reason?" Walter didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Evelyn, at the boy beside him, at the snow falling softly around them. "I think sometimes," he said, "we don't need a reason. We just need a second chance." Josh smiled, and Evelyn, blinking back tears, whispered, "We finally got ours." They stood there for a while, letting the past fall silent behind them, letting the future unfold with each breath. And as the wind stirred through the trees, lifting powdery snow into glittering spirals, the 3 of them turned and began walking again, Walter, Evelyn, and Josh, guided by a black dog named Cosmos, whose paw prints led them forward into the light. The forest, once full of shadows, was finally still, and healing had found its home.